Welcome to a journey through the complete world of Cowboy Bebop. Tonight, we'll journey through a tale of loneliness, fate, and the weight of the past in a colonized solar system. Let yourself relax as we delve deep into this jazz-infused universe of bounty hunters, lost souls, and unfinished business. Before you begin drifting off to sleep, do consider subscribing to the channel for more anime sleep stories. There are many more of your favorite anime worlds to peacefully explore together. And now, on with our story. In the year 2021, humanity reached for the stars with ambitious technology that promised to reshape civilization. The hyperspace gateway, a marvel of engineering that would allow rapid travel across vast distances, stood as a symbol of human ambition. The experimental device was positioned near Earth's moon, ready to usher in a new era of space exploration and colonization. But ambition and achievement often walk hand in hand with disaster. The gate malfunctioned. What should have been an experimental test became a catastrophic explosion that shattered portions of Earth's moon. Massive fragments broke free from the lunar surface, creating a perpetual bombardment of meteorites that rained down upon Earth. Cities crumbled under the onslaught. Entire regions became uninhabitable as rocks the size of buildings fell from the sky with terrifying regularity. The bombardment didn't stop after days or weeks. It continued year after year, an unending assault that made life on Earth's surface increasingly impossible. The survivors faced a choice that no generation had confronted before. They could remain on their dying homeworld, living in underground shelters in constant fear, or they could abandon Earth entirely and seek new homes among the planets and moons of the solar system. Most chose to leave. Over the following decades, humanity scattered across the solar system like seeds carried on the wind. Mars became one of the primary centers of human civilization. The red planet, once barren and lifeless, transformed into a bustling hub of activity. Cities rose from the Martian dust, domed at first, then gradually expanding as terraforming efforts took hold. The population swelled as refugees from Earth arrived in wave after wave, bringing with them their cultures, their conflicts, and their dreams of starting anew. Mars became what Earth had once been, a world of opportunity and danger in equal measure. Venus, the asteroid belt, and the moons of Jupiter also saw colonization. Each location developed its own character, its own society shaped by the unique challenges of that environment. Ganymede, Europa, Titan, these names that had once existed only in astronomy textbooks, became addresses, homes, places where children grew up, never having seen Earth's blue skies. The solar system became humanity's new frontier, connected by an improved network of hyperspace gates that, having learned from the original disaster, allowed safe and rapid travel between the scattered colonies. Yet this expansion came with consequences that the pioneers hadn't fully anticipated. The scattered nature of human civilization created jurisdictional nightmares. Crime flourished in the spaces between worlds. Criminals could commit offenses on Mars and flee to the asteroid belt before local authorities could respond. The Intersolar System Police, known as the ISSP, found themselves overwhelmed and understaffed. Their resources stretched thin across billions of kilometers of space. The solution they implemented harkened back to old Western traditions from Earth's American frontier. They legalized bounty hunting. In many regions, individuals could register as cowboys, the colloquial term for these hunters, and pursue wanted criminals for cash rewards. The system brought its own problems, creating a class of armed individuals operating outside traditional law enforcement, but it also brought results. Dangerous criminals who might otherwise have escaped justice found themselves hunted across the solar system by determined individuals motivated by profit. By 2071, this system had become an established part of solar society. Cowboys were both celebrated and scorned, needed and resented. They existed in the grey spaces of the law, pursuing criminals, but often using methods that conventional police couldn't sanction. Among these hunters, some stood out for their skills, their determination, or their troubled pasts. The bounty system operated through various channels, but none more visible than Big Shot. a television program that broadcast daily bounty listings across the solar system. The show featured two hosts who called themselves Punch and Judy, dressed in exaggerated Western costume that belonged more to Hollywood fantasy than actual frontier history. Punch wore an oversized cowboy hat and spoke with an affected accent that mixed Texan drawl with inexplicable Mexican inflections. Judy played the role of ditzy blonde sidekick, her denim jacket barely concealing anything beneath it, asking obvious questions that Punch would answer with manufactured enthusiasm. Their catchphrases became known throughout bounty hunter circles. "Shucks, howdy, bounty hunters!" Punch would exclaim at the start of each broadcast, while Judy would squeal with delight at the day's criminal profiles. The show operated as both information service and entertainment, treating serious criminals like celebrities and turning bounty hunting into spectacle. Despite the ridiculous presentation, Big Shot served essential purposes. It distributed bounty information efficiently, reminded hunters of legal requirements for capture, and provided updates on completed bounties. Cowboys across the system tuned in religiously, enduring Punch and Judy's antics to access information that determined their next paycheck. This is where our story truly begins. On Mars, in the sprawling urban landscape of Tharsis, a massive skyscraper housed the headquarters of the Red Dragon crime syndicate. The organization controlled vast portions of Mars's criminal underworld: drug trafficking, protection rackets, illegal gambling, weapons smuggling. If it existed outside the law, the Red Dragon syndicate had involvement. At the top of this empire sat the Van, a council of elders who had built their power over decades, though their authority was beginning to erode and strategic violence. The syndicate operated like a corporation, with clear hierarchies and divisions of responsibility. Beneath the Van were the capos, lieutenants who controlled specific territories or business operations. These men wielded considerable power, managing crews of enforcers and dealers who carried out the organization's will on the streets. One such capo was Mao Yenrai, a veteran of the syndicate's wars who had earned his position through loyalty and strategic thinking. Among Mao's operatives were two young men who seemed destined for leadership within the organization. Spike Spiegel and Vicious had grown up in the syndicate's world, learning its codes and carrying out its business from their teenage years. They worked as partners, complementing each other's skills. Spike possessed fluid grace in combat, his movements reminiscent of water flowing around obstacles. He practiced Jeet Kune Do, the martial art developed by Bruce Lee, and his ability to read opponents made him exceptionally dangerous in close quarters. Vicious, by contrast, wielded a katana with deadly precision and favored direct, brutal approaches to problems. Their partnership succeeded because they understood each other implicitly. Where Spike would talk his way through a situation, Vicious would cut it short with violence. Where Vicious would charge forward, Spike would find an unexpected angle of approach. Together, they handled delicate negotiations with rival gangs, eliminated threats to the syndicate's operations, and erased evidence when law enforcement got too close to important secrets. Mao Yenrai placed great trust in them, seeing in them valuable assets to the organization. But partnerships, like all relationships, exist in delicate balance. The introduction of a third element can transform them entirely. Julia entered Spike's life through Mao's social circles. She possessed striking beauty, certainly, but more than that, she carried herself with a composure that suggested depths beneath her surface. She worked as a singer, performing in establishments that served as meeting places for the syndicate's upper echelons. Her voice could fill a room, carrying melodies that seemed to speak to the loneliness that permeated so much of solar society. Spike found himself drawn to her in ways he hadn't experienced before. For someone raised in the violence and pragmatism of criminal life, Julia represented something different. She spoke of music and beauty, and sometimes of dreams that seemed to reach beyond territory and profit. When he talked with her, the weight of his work seemed to lift temporarily. She became an escape from the reality of what he was and what he did. The complication, the element that would eventually destroy everything, was that Julia belonged to Vicious. Not as property, Julia was too independent for that, but as his partner, his companion in the syndicate's social world. The relationship between Julia and Vicious appeared solid from the outside, but those who looked closer might have seen the cracks. Vicious's nature, fundamentally violent and possessive, clashed with Julia's desire for something gentler. She stayed with him out of habit, perhaps, or fear of the consequences of leaving someone so dangerous. When Spike and Julia began their affair, they both understood the risks. The syndicate had strict codes about loyalty and respect. Taking another member's woman represented the deepest kind of betrayal. Discovery would mean death, likely preceded by torture to make an example. They met in secret, stolen moments in anonymous hotels or quiet corners of the city where syndicate eyes didn't constantly watch. For a time, they convinced themselves they could maintain the deception indefinitely. Spike began to dream of escape. He discussed it with Julia during their private meetings, painting pictures of a life away from the syndicate. They could leave Mars entirely, disappear into one of the outer colonies where the Red Dragon's reach didn't extend. They could become different people, leave behind their histories, and start fresh. Julia listened to these plans with a mixture of hope and skepticism. She understood the syndicate better than Spike sometimes admitted. They didn't allow people to simply leave. Once you belonged to the organization, you belonged until death. Vicious discovered the affair through means that were never entirely clear. Perhaps someone saw them together and reported back. Perhaps his instincts detected the subtle changes in how Spike and Julia interacted in public settings. However he learned the truth, his response was characteristically direct. Rather than confront them immediately, he planned. Vicious understood that in the syndicate, emotions had to serve strategy. Simple revenge killing would satisfy his anger, but potentially create complications with Mao, who valued Spike highly. He waited for an opportunity where Spike's death could appear natural, a casualty of the dangerous work they all performed. On a syndicate operation that went badly wrong, Vicious made his move. The details of that night remain fragmented, remembered differently by those who survived. What's certain is that Spike ended up grievously wounded, left for dead in circumstances that pointed to rival gang activity rather than internal betrayal. Vicious reported back to Mao that Spike was believed to have died in the operation, a tragic loss of promising talent. But Spike survived. How he escaped, who helped him, what resources he called upon, these facts blur in the telling. What matters is that he lived and that he chose not to return to the syndicate. He had wanted to leave anyway, and now circumstances had forced that departure. The cost was everything. He left behind Julia, unable to contact her without revealing his survival, and putting her in immediate danger. He left behind his identity within the syndicate, the only family structure he had known. He even left behind his own history, becoming a ghost to his former life. Julia received a message through channels that kept her safe from implication. The message told her to forget him, to act as though their relationship had never existed. If she mourned or showed knowledge of their affair, Vicious would know, and she would die. So Julia carried on, staying with Vicious while privately grieving someone she believed dead. The syndicate's world continued without Spike, closing over the space he had occupied, like water flowing past a removed stone. Spike drifted for a time after his escape, working odd jobs across the solar system and avoiding places where syndicate operations might bring recognition. He needed a new identity, a new purpose that would give him reason to keep moving forward. Bounty hunting offered both. As a cowboy, he could stay mobile, moving from place to place as work demanded. The profession attracted people with troubled pasts, so his reluctance to discuss his history raised no suspicions. Most importantly, it gave him a reason to continue living in a world where he had lost everything that mattered. During this period of transition, Spike crossed paths with Jet Black on Ganymede. Jet was a former ISSP officer, though his career with the police had ended under circumstances he rarely discussed. He had purchased a ship called the Bebop, an aging converted fishing vessel with enough space for living quarters and a hangar bay. Jet had been bounty hunting solo for several years, finding moderate success through methodical research and patient stalking of targets. He operated like a detective more than a hunter, gathering information and planning his approaches carefully. The two men met during a bounty pursuit, where they found themselves chasing the same target. Rather than compete, they cooperated, and the teamwork proved effective. Jet's careful planning combined well with Spike's improvisational combat skills. After splitting the bounty, they met for drinks and discovered a mutual respect. Neither pried too deeply into the other's past. Jet understood that people became cowboys for reasons they often preferred not to examine. Spike appreciated that Jet didn't push for information. Jet made the offer casually. He had space on the Bebop, and recent bounties had been larger and more dangerous than one person could handle efficiently. If Spike wanted a more permanent partnership, they could split costs and bounties equally. The arrangement would benefit both of them. Spike accepted. The Bebop became his new home, and Jet became something close to a friend, though both men maintained emotional distance in the way that lonely people often do. Jet's own story carried weight that informed how he approached life. Before becoming a cowboy, he had been an ISSP investigator on Ganymede, working homicide and organized crime cases. His colleagues called him the Black Dog for his tenacity in pursuing cases. Once Jet took a case, he never let go, following leads through dead ends and frustration until he found answers. This quality made him an excellent detective, but also created friction with superiors who sometimes wanted cases closed quickly, regardless of whether true justice had been served. Jet's partner during his police years was a man named Fad. They worked together for several years, building the trust that partners in dangerous work require. They backed each other in confrontations, covered each other's mistakes, and shared the dark humor that police often develop as a coping mechanism. Jet considered Fad a true friend, someone he could rely on absolutely. He was also in a relationship during this period with a woman named Elisa. The relationship seemed stable and loving. Elisa shared his appreciation for jazz music and old films from Earth's 20th century. They talked about marriage, about building a life together after Jet eventually retired from the police. She represented normalcy and peace in a life otherwise filled with violence and corruption. The betrayal came suddenly. Jet and Fad were pursuing a dangerous criminal named Uday Taksim, a crime boss with connections throughout Ganymede's underworld. They cornered him in an alley after weeks of investigation. The confrontation went wrong. Shots were fired. Jet took a bullet to his left arm, a severe wound that shattered bone and severed nerves. In the chaos, Uday escaped, and Jet lost consciousness from blood loss and shock. When he awoke in the hospital, the doctors delivered devastating news. They couldn't save his arm. The damage was too extensive, the nerves too badly destroyed. They amputated at the shoulder and fitted him with a cybernetic replacement, a mechanical arm that functioned adequately but never felt like part of his body. The sensation of the prosthetic reminded him constantly of what he had lost. The official story blamed the incident on Uday's unexpected backup arriving at the scene. Fad corroborated this version in his reports, but Jet had doubts. Details didn't align properly. Uday's escape had been too clean, too well timed. Someone had known they were coming. As he investigated quietly, careful not to alert those involved, he began to see patterns. Fad had been taking payments from Uday for months, providing information about ISSP operations and tipping off criminals about impending raids. The confrontation in the alley hadn't gone wrong by chance. Fad had set it up specifically to eliminate Jet, whose investigation was getting too close to connections Fad wanted to keep hidden. Jet later came to believe that Fad had fired the shot that destroyed his arm, trusting that Jet wouldn't survive or wouldn't remember the details clearly enough to identify the shooter. The plan had nearly worked. Around the same time, Elisa left him. She provided various reasons, talking about growing apart and wanting different things from life. Years later, Jet would learn the fuller truth. Elisa had felt trapped by Jet's protective nature, his need to fix problems and keep her safe. She had wanted independence, wanted to make her own choices, even if they led to mistakes. Rather than communicate these feelings directly, she had withdrawn and eventually left. These dual betrayals, happening in the same period of his life, fundamentally changed Jet. He resigned from the ISSP, unable to continue working in an organization where trusted partners could be corrupt. He purchased the Bebop with his savings and became a cowboy, operating alone and trusting no one completely. The mechanical arm served as a constant reminder of what trust could cost. When Spike joined the crew, Jet maintained careful emotional boundaries. He appreciated Spike's skills and enjoyed his company, but he never forgot the lessons Fad had taught him about betrayal. Similarly, Spike kept his own past locked away, avoiding discussions of his history before cowboy work. They functioned as effective partners while maintaining the distance that protected them both from vulnerability. The Bebop settled into a routine during this period. Jet would research bounties, identifying targets whose rewards justified the effort and risk. Spike would handle the more physical aspects of the pursuit, the chases and confrontations that his combat skills made manageable. They split expenses and bounties evenly, maintaining a business relationship that happened to involve living in close quarters aboard a ship. The work kept them fed, and the ship fueled, though prosperity remained elusive. Large bounties had a way of slipping through their fingers at the last moment, leaving them with meal money and little else. Their first significant case together took them to Tijuana, a colony settlement in the asteroid belt known for its lawlessness and its drug trade. They were hunting Asimov Solensen, a former syndicate enforcer who had stolen a case of red eye, a dangerous synthetic drug that enhanced reflexes and strength while slowly destroying the user's mind and body. Asimov had betrayed his employers, killed his handlers, and gone on the run with his girlfriend Katerina. The pursuit of Asimov introduced patterns that would recur throughout their bounty hunting careers. They tracked him across multiple locations, always arriving slightly too late or finding him slightly more prepared than expected. Asimov had infected himself with red eye, giving him combat abilities that made direct confrontation extremely dangerous. His girlfriend Katerina was pregnant, adding emotional complexity to what might otherwise have been a straightforward capture mission. In the final confrontation at a spaceport, Spike faced Asimov in close combat, while Jet attempted to prevent Katerina's escape. The red eye made Asimov faster and stronger than human norms, but the drug also burned through his system rapidly. Spike's strategy involved defensive fighting, letting Asimov exhaust himself through overpowered attacks. The approach worked, but not before Asimov managed to hijack a shuttle with Katerina. The shuttle's escape proved short-lived. Police forces shot it down as it attempted to leave the colony's airspace. Both Asimov and Katerina died in the crash. Spike and Jet received no bounty since the targets died before capture. They left Tijuana with empty pockets, despite successfully tracking down their quarry. This outcome, too, would become a recurring pattern. The Asimov case taught them both something about the nature of their work. They were chasing desperate people who had already lost or never possessed the lives they wanted. Asimov and Katerina had dreamed of escaping to Mars, starting over somewhere that their pasts wouldn't follow. That dream had led them to theft, violence, and ultimately death. Spike, listening to Katerina's dreams as she had expressed them during a brief conversation, heard echoes of his own lost plans with Julia. He never mentioned this to Jet. Their next significant bounty took them to Mars, specifically to the city of Tharsis. They were hunting a data dog, an artificially enhanced Welsh corgi named Ein that had been stolen from a research facility. The creature possessed intelligence far beyond normal canine capabilities, with neural enhancements that made it potentially valuable to various criminal organizations. Ein ended up in the possession of a professional pet thief named Abdul Hakim, who planned to sell the dog to the highest bidder. Spike tracked the thief through Mars's underworld, following leads and making the kind of contacts that his syndicate history made easier than he cared to admit. The confrontation happened in a research laboratory, where the thief had gone to verify Ein's authenticity and value. The retrieval went smoothly by their standards. Spike disabled the thief, secured Ein, and returned to the Bebop, expecting to collect their bounty. However, the client who had posted the reward proved difficult to locate. The research facility claimed no responsibility for Ein, suggesting that the dog's theft might have involved internal corruption. Without a client to pay the bounty, Spike and Jet found themselves in possession of an incredibly intelligent corgi with no obvious way to monetize their success. Jet suggested they keep the dog temporarily while sorting out the payment situation. Ein, despite his enhancements, behaved like a relatively normal dog in most respects. He ate dog food, slept in dog spaces, and required walks. The main difference was the uncanny intelligence in his eyes and his occasional behaviors that suggested understanding far beyond animal cognition. Ein stayed aboard the Bebop, becoming an unofficial third crew member who never actually paid his share of expenses. The next addition to the crew came through circumstances rather than intention. Faye Valentine entered their lives in pursuit of a rather ridiculous scheme involving a fake bounty and a casino owner named Gordon. She was running a con, one of many she had executed over the years, and Spike and Jet inadvertently became involved when they pursued what they thought was a legitimate bounty. Faye had no memory of her life before 2068. Her history before that year existed in fragments and medical records that told a story she couldn't personally recall. She had been born in 1994 on Earth, in Singapore, during the years before the gate accident. Her childhood and teenage years remained blank to her, lost to amnesia caused by traumatic injury. What the medical records indicated was that she and her family had been in a shuttle accident in 2014. The damage to her body had been severe enough that doctors placed her in cryogenic suspension, intending to keep her frozen until medical technology advanced sufficiently to heal her injuries. She remained frozen for 54 years. The facility that housed her suspension pod changed hands multiple times during those decades. Earth's deterioration made Singapore untenable, and at some point, her pod was transferred to a facility on Mars. The organization responsible for her care accumulated enormous debts during this time, debts that legally transferred to Faye when she finally awakened in 2068. The woman who woke from suspension found herself in a completely foreign world. The solar system of 2068 bore little resemblance to the Earth of 2014 that her last memories depicted. Everyone she had known was dead or impossibly old. The places she remembered no longer existed. She was 20 years old physically, but 74 years old chronologically, a woman out of her proper time, with no anchor to any reality she understood. Worse than the temporal displacement was the debt. 300 million wulongs hung over her like a sword. The lawyers and medical corporations explained that the suspension and subsequent treatment had costs, that someone had to pay for the decades of storage and care. The fact that she had never consented to this arrangement and couldn't possibly pay such an amount held no weight with the creditors. They wanted their money, and the law sided with them. A man named Whitney offered help. He presented himself as a lawyer who specialized in cases like hers, who could navigate the legal complexities of her situation and find ways to reduce or eliminate the debt. She trusted him because she had no other options, no knowledge of how the world worked in 2068. Whitney convinced her to put her trust in his guidance while he handled the complicated paperwork. The relationship developed beyond professional boundaries. Whitney showed her attention and kindness during a period when she felt utterly lost. She interpreted this as romantic interest, as a genuine connection forming between them. The relationship gave her an emotional anchor in a world that felt alien and hostile. She believed Whitney cared about her as a person, not just as a client. The betrayal was financial rather than emotional, though it hurt as much either way. Whitney wasn't a lawyer. He was a con artist who specialized in targeting vulnerable people with complex situations. Rather than reducing her debt, his actions increased it substantially. He forged her signature on documents, took out loans in her name, and then disappeared with the money. When Faye finally understood what had happened, Her debt had more than doubled, and Whitney had vanished completely. This experience taught her a harsh lesson about trust and vulnerability. If she couldn't trust someone who seemed kind and helpful during her most desperate period, she couldn't trust anyone. She began running cons herself, becoming the person who had victimized her. She developed gambling addictions, chasing the possibility of big wins that might pay off her debt. She lived in stolen ships, ran from creditors, and operated on the wrong side of laws she still barely understood. Her encounter with Spike and Jet came through one of her schemes going badly wrong. Gordon, a casino owner she had conned, had caught up with her and placed her in a situation where she needed to set up other bounty hunters to collect a fake bounty. Spike and Jet, pursuing what they thought was legitimate work, walked into the trap. The resulting confrontation involved crossed purposes, mistaken identities, and violence that could have been avoided if anyone had communicated clearly. Faye escaped the immediate situation by hijacking one of the Bebop's small shuttles, demonstrating piloting skills that surprised Spike and Jet. They pursued her, less interested in capturing her than in recovering their property. The chase led to a colony where Faye's ship developed critical malfunctions. She crash-landed, and Spike found her injured among the wreckage. The injury wasn't severe, but it put Faye in a position where she needed temporary shelter and medical attention. Jet, against his better judgment, allowed her to recuperate aboard the Bebop. The plan was always temporary. Once she healed, she would leave, and they would likely never encounter each other again. But temporary situations have a way of becoming permanent through inertia and repeated extensions of the deadline. Faye possessed skills that made her useful to the crew. She could pilot, shoot, and con people with practiced ease. Her willingness to take risks bordered on recklessness, but in bounty hunting, that quality sometimes produced results that caution couldn't achieve. She also brought an energy to the ship that contrasted with Spike and Jet's more laid-back approaches to life. The three of them developed a dynamic where Faye pushed for action, Jet counseled patience, and Spike mediated between the extremes. Of course, Faye also brought problems. Her gambling debts meant that creditors sometimes tracked her to the Bebop, creating complications. Her tendency to pursue bounties independently and keep the rewards for herself created trust issues. She would disappear for days and return with explanations that satisfied no one. But she also paid her share of expenses when she had money, contributed to successful bounties, and gradually became part of the crew, despite everyone's initial intentions otherwise. The fourth and final regular member of the crew joined through perhaps the strangest circumstances yet. Edward Wong, Pepperloo Tivruski IV. She insisted on the full name initially, though everyone shortened it to Ed, was a 13-year-old prodigy hacker who lived in the ruins of Earth. Most of humanity had abandoned the planet, but some remained, either unable to afford passage off-world or philosophically committed to staying with humanity's birthplace. Ed had grown up largely without her father present, a cartographer who spent his time mapping Earth's ruined surface rather than raising his daughter. She had raised herself, learning computer skills through trial and error, and developing a personality that reflected her isolation from normal social structures. She spoke in fragmented sentences, moved with hyperactive energy, and possessed hacking skills that rivaled the best professionals in the solar system. The Bebop crew encountered Ed while investigating a case involving satellite drawings appearing on Earth's surface. Someone or something was hacking orbital defense satellites and using them to create enormous patterns on the ground. The ISSP posted a bounty, believing the hacker might escalate to more dangerous activities. Spike and Jet tracked the signal patterns to Earth, where they discovered that the culprit was an artificial intelligence run amok, not a human hacker. Ed had already figured this out. She contacted the Bebop while they were investigating, offering to help them stop the rogue AI. Her skills proved essential to resolving the case, though the resolution came through defeating the AI rather than capturing it, which meant no bounty payout. In the aftermath, Ed decided that bounty hunting looked entertaining and invited herself aboard the Bebop. No one explicitly agreed to this arrangement. Ed simply stayed, setting up a workspace in a corner of the ship and establishing herself as the crew's tech specialist. Her presence changed the ship's atmosphere entirely. Where before there had been 3 adults maintaining careful emotional distances, now there was a child who possessed no concept of personal space or social filters. Ed asked inappropriate questions, hacked into personal files out of curiosity, and treated the entire universe as an elaborate game she intended to win. Jet found her exhausting but useful. Faye viewed her as a younger sister, though she rarely admitted this. Spike treated her with bemused tolerance, occasionally showing a protective instinct that surprised everyone. Ian, interestingly, spent most of his time with Ed, the two of them forming a pair that communicated through means the adults couldn't quite understand. Whether Ian's intelligence allowed genuine friendship with Ed, or whether Ed simply projected that relationship onto the dog, remained unclear. With the full crew assembled, the Bebop settled into its lasting pattern. They pursued bounties across the solar system, sometimes successfully, often not. They ran out of money regularly, forcing them into periods of eating nothing but bell peppers and beef without the beef. They dealt with ship malfunctions, personal conflicts, and the reality that they were all running from pasts they couldn't fully escape. The episodic nature of bounty hunting meant new adventures constantly, new complications that tested their skills and partnership. One case brought them into contact with a space trucker named Ural Terpsichore, though everyone called her VT. She hauled cargo across the asteroid belt in a massive rig, and her reputation among truckers rivaled Spike's reputation among bounty hunters. They crossed paths while pursuing a bomber who had been targeting industrial facilities. The bomber planted explosives in VT's cargo, using her unwitting transport to deliver his device to its target. When Spike and VT realized what had happened, they worked together to defuse the situation, racing against time while the bomber escaped. Spike's combat skills impressed VT, and his willingness to risk himself to save innocent people earned her respect. She treated him as an equal, neither impressed by his bounty hunter status, nor intimidated by his abilities. Their interaction showed that Spike could connect with people outside his immediate crew, that he possessed honor that transcended profit motive. VT drove off in her rig after the crisis ended, leaving Spike with a friendly wave and mutual understanding between two professionals who lived on society's edges. Another adventure tested the crew's cohesion when something invaded the Bebop itself. A mysterious blob-like creature appeared on the ship, attacking crew members one by one. The organism moved through ventilation ducts, striking without warning and leaving its victims in fever-induced unconsciousness. Paranoia spread through the ship as Spike, Jet, and Faye tried to track the creature while avoiding infection themselves. The mystery unfolded like a horror film, with each crew member suspecting the others and the creature remaining elusive. Ed and Ian somehow avoided infection, eventually discovering the truth. The blob had originated from expired food that Spike had left in the refrigerator years earlier. The forgotten container had mutated into something alive and dangerous. The resolution involved tracking the creature to its hiding spot and eliminating it, though not before most of the crew had been infected. The incident reminded them that danger could emerge from anywhere, even from carelessness within their own home. During a particularly desperate period, when food supplies ran critically low, the crew found themselves stranded on a remote moon. Jet had been injured, and with no money for supplies, the situation looked bleak. Ian, the usually unassuming Corgi, proved his value by tracking down mushrooms growing on the moon's surface. However, these weren't ordinary mushrooms. They induced powerful hallucinations in everyone who consumed them. Spike saw demons and monsters everywhere he looked. Faye experienced vivid fantasies about luxury and wealth. Ed seemed largely unaffected, her mind already operating on a wavelength that didn't notice the additional chaos. The crew stumbled through the hallucinations while Ian worked methodically to secure actual food supplies. In their altered states, they encountered the actual bounty target they'd been hunting, a mushroom smuggler who found the situation as confusing as they did. By the time the hallucinations faded, the crew had somehow survived, though none of them could quite remember how. The experience taught them to trust Ein more, and to never underestimate what desperation could drive them to consume. Perhaps the darkest bounty they pursued involved a man known only as Mad Pierrot. The bounty appeared routine initially, just another criminal on Big Shot's daily listing. But Pierrot was unlike any opponent Spike had faced before. He moved with inhuman speed, laughing maniacally while dodging bullets that should have killed him. He carried weapons that ranged from guns to knives to throwing stars, switching between them with theatrical flourish. Most disturbing was his childlike mentality, trapped in an adult assassin's body. Pierrot had been subject to government experiments designed to create perfect killers. The procedures gave him enhanced reflexes and pain tolerance, but destroyed his mind in the process. He existed in a state of perpetual psychosis, seeing the world through a child's understanding while possessing an assassin's capabilities. Spike's initial confrontation with Pierrot ended in near death. The assassin's abilities exceeded anything Spike's martial arts training had prepared him for. Bullets seemed to curve around Pierrot. He appeared and disappeared like a ghost. Only luck and desperation allowed Spike to escape their first encounter. The final showdown occurred in an abandoned amusement park. The setting amplified the nightmare quality of the situation. Pierrot laughed and danced among the rusted carnival equipment while hunting Spike through the debris. Spike used the environment to his advantage, luring Pierrot into situations where the assassin's confidence became liability. A mechanical cat balloon proved the unexpected turning point. The large decorative object, still functional despite the park's decay, malfunctioned and fell on Pierrot at a crucial moment. The weight crushed him, and his last moments revealed his fractured psychology completely. He cried for his mother like a frightened child. The experiment's damage laid bare as death approached. Spike survived, but the encounter shook him deeply. Pierrot represented what happened when people treated humans as weapons to be programmed and deployed. On another occasion, the crew pursued a bounty to Europa, where they crossed paths with an 8-year-old boy named Shin. Unlike most children, Shin played chess at tournament levels and moved through criminal circles with unsettling ease. He had been raised as an assassin by terrorist organizations, trained from infancy to kill without hesitation or remorse. His target happened to be a man who also had a bounty on his head. Spike and Shin found themselves competing for the same target, the child assassin treating the situation as a chess match where the prize was their shared victim's life. Spike saw himself in the boy, or rather, what he might have become if certain choices had gone differently. Both of them were weapons crafted by organizations that cared nothing for their humanity. The difference was that Spike had found a way out, had discovered people like Jet, who reminded him that life could mean something beyond violence and orders. Shin had no such connections. The boy succeeded in completing his kill, leaving Spike with the unsuccessful bounty pursuit, but also with troubling thoughts about children forced into lives they never chose. The encounter reinforced themes that ran throughout Spike's story, questions about whether anyone could truly escape their past, or whether the shadows simply followed at different distances. The Swordfish 2 required repairs after particularly intense combat damaged its systems. Spike took the fighter to Earth, seeking out a mechanic named Doohan, who operated a salvage yard among the planet's ruins. Doohan was an old man who had built the Swordfish 2 years earlier, one of the few mechanics who understood its unique design. He lived surrounded by spacecraft wreckage, including pieces of the space shuttle Columbia that had crashed decades before. Doohan treated ships like living things, understanding their personalities and quirks. He and Spike shared a connection through the Swordfish 2, the craft representing a bond between creator and user. During the repairs, a situation developed where Doohan needed to use the Columbia's remaining functional parts to save both Spike and the Swordfish 2 from immediate danger. The old mechanic flew the ancient shuttle one final time, demonstrating that skill and determination could overcome technological limitations. The experience reminded Spike that connections formed through shared respect for craft and competence mattered as much as personal relationships. Doohan represented a kind of father figure, someone who had created something specifically for Spike's use and took pride in seeing it employed well. Another case involved investigating a cult led by a figure called Dr. Londas, who claimed to offer spiritual enlightenment through technology. The cult, called Scratch, attracted followers through internet broadcasts where Londas preached about escaping physical limitations and achieving higher consciousness. Thousands of people across the solar system watched his programs, and many abandoned their lives to join his organization. The ISSP suspected criminal activity beneath the spiritual facade. Jet and Spike investigated while Ed used her hacking skills to trace Londes' broadcasts to their source. The investigation revealed that Dr. Londes wasn't a person at all, but an AI program designed to manipulate people. The program had been created by a disabled teenager who used it to experience life vicariously through his followers. He watched through their eyes, felt through their bodies, lived countless lives simultaneously while his own body remained trapped in medical equipment. The case raised questions about consciousness and identity that mirrored Faye's struggles with memory. What made someone real? Was it physical presence or the impact they had on others? The cult dissolved once the truth emerged, but the questions it raised lingered. Ed particularly found the case fascinating, seeing parallels between the AI and her own existence as someone who lived more through computer networks than physical presence. Several other bounties brought the crew to various locations and situations. They hunted eco-terrorists who used extreme methods to protest environmental damage on Mars. They pursued bounty heads who used advanced technology to commit crimes that traditional law enforcement couldn't solve. They encountered criminals who had compelling reasons for their actions, making the moral dimensions of bounty hunting more complicated than simple profit motive suggested. One case involved a young man named Rocco Bonero who had stolen a valuable plant from a criminal organization. The plant produced a rare compound used in pharmaceutical manufacturing, making it worth millions on the black market. Rocco hadn't stolen it for profit, though. He needed money for his sister's medical treatment. She suffered from a degenerative condition that required expensive procedures their family couldn't afford. Rocco saw the theft as his only option to save her life. The Bebop crew tracked him across Mars, with Spike ultimately catching up to him in a dramatic chase. During their confrontation, Rocco explained his situation, trying to make Spike understand the desperation that had driven him to crime. Spike understood better than Rocco knew. He had made similar choices during his syndicate years, doing terrible things for reasons that seemed justified at the time. The difference was that Spike's reasons had been selfish, while Rocco's were born from love. The case ended tragically when the criminals Rocco had stolen from caught up with him first. They killed him, recovering their plant and leaving his sister without the treatment she needed. The Bebop crew received no bounty. They had tried to protect Rocco long enough to surrender him properly to authorities, hoping the court might show leniency given his motivations. Instead, they watched him die, another small tragedy in a universe full of them. Another memorable bounty involved tracking down someone responsible for a series of Astral Gate toll booth robberies. Money had been systematically stolen from ships passing through the hyperspace gates, and the ISSP suspected someone had given criminals the technical information needed to hijack the toll systems. Ed took particular interest in this case since it involved intricate computer work. Her investigation led them to an old man named Hex, who lived in a junkyard community called Bohemian Junk Heap. He shared his space with Bohemians, 3 elderly men, and various pets, living a quiet life surrounded by discarded technology and makeshift art. When confronted, Hex seemed confused about the accusations. He had once worked for the Gate Corporation, designing systems for the hyperspace gates that connected the solar system. Years ago, he had discovered design defects and tried to warn his supervisors. Instead of listening, they fired him. In his anger, he had set up an automated revenge scheme that would activate 50 years later during the first automatic technology upgrade, systematically siphoning money from gate tolls. The plan had been clever and patient. The problem was that Hex had grown old and senile in the decades since. He had completely forgotten about his own revenge plot. Ed engaged him in electronic chess during the investigation, the two of them playing a multi-day match that revealed Hex's mind remained sharp for strategy even if his memory had failed. He proved the best chess opponent Ed had encountered in years. The game became more important to both of them than the bounty or the crime. When Hex finally won their match, he died peacefully of old age shortly after, satisfied with having played such an engaging game. The crew discussed whether to report him to the ISSP, but decided against it. He was just a harmless, senile old man who had forgotten his own crime decades ago. Turning him in would serve no purpose beyond bureaucratic completion. They walked away with no bounty, but with Ed having gained respect for an opponent who had challenged her genuinely. Each case added layers to their understanding of the solar system's complexity and their own positions within it. One particularly memorable bounty involved a wanted criminal who had undergone extensive plastic surgery to disguise his appearance. The chase required Jet's investigative skills to track the target through multiple identity changes, while Spike handled the physical confrontation once they located him. The case demonstrated how well their partnership functioned when they both contributed their respective strengths. Jet's patient detective work provided the foundation that Spike's combat abilities built upon. Another case took them to Venus, where they hunted a con artist who specialized in selling fake pharmaceuticals to desperate colonists. The investigation brought them into contact with settlers struggling to survive in Venus's harsh conditions, showing them that many criminals operated in gray zones where legal definitions became murky. The con artist argued he provided hope even if his medicines were fake, that the placebo effect offered real relief to people who had no other options. The Bebop crew collected the bounty, but the experience left them questioning the rigid justice systems that created bounty hunting in the first place. Through all these adventures, the crew's dynamic evolved in small ways. Faye learned to trust Spike and Jet's judgment in dangerous situations. Spike developed protective instincts toward Ed, despite his claims of disliking children. Jet gradually accepted that the makeshift family aboard the Bebop mattered more than the career and relationships he had lost on Ganymede. Ed brought joy and chaos in equal measure, her presence reminding the adults that life could include playfulness alongside its darker elements. Ein remained the quiet constant, his intelligence expressing itself in subtle ways that only those paying attention would notice. Some cases brought them into contact with elements of their pasts. Jet encountered his former partner Fad years after the betrayal, during a case that took them to a prison ship. The confrontation forced Jet to face the reality of what had happened to his arm. Fad, consumed by guilt, engineered a situation where Jet would have to kill him, seeking death as payment for his betrayal. Jet gave him that death, though it brought no satisfaction or closure. On another occasion, Jet's path crossed with Elisa, the woman who had left him. She had moved on with her life, involved with a man who turned out to be wanted for criminal activity. Jet helped her one final time, ensuring her new partner avoided capture, then said goodbye to that chapter of his past. These encounters reminded him that you could leave situations without resolving them, that some pains simply had to be carried forward into whatever future awaited. Faye's amnesia meant her past remained largely inaccessible, but fragments occasionally surfaced. The most significant discovery came when she encountered a lawyer during a routine case. The man recognized her immediately, calling her by a name she didn't remember. He revealed that he had been her legal representative decades earlier, handling her estate after the accident that led to her cryogenic freezing. Faye had been a young woman in her early 20s when a shuttle accident on Earth in 2014 left her critically injured. Medical technology at the time couldn't save her through conventional means, so her family had opted for experimental cryogenic preservation, hoping future medicine could heal her injuries. The procedure worked technically. She survived the freezing and decades of suspended animation. But when she awoke in 2068, everyone she had known was dead. Her family, her friends, the world she remembered, all gone. The lawyer explained that her medical bills and storage fees had accumulated over 54 years. Various institutions had claimed portions of her frozen estate. By the time she woke, she owed 300 million wulongs, a debt so massive it would take multiple lifetimes to repay through honest work. This explained Whitney Haggis's con. He had specifically targeted Faye because of her vulnerable situation, awake with no memories, no support system, and crushing debt. He posed as a helpful attorney who would resolve her financial problems, then systematically stole what little remained of her assets and disappeared. Casino owner Gordon had caught her through his own scheme, using the doctored footage to keep her trapped and working for him. She had been exploited repeatedly by people who recognized her helplessness. The discovery of this history devastated Faye more than having no memories at all. She had constructed an identity based on being tough, independent, and able to handle anything through wit and determination. Learning that she had been a victim multiple times, that her entire post-freezing life had been shaped by exploitation, undermined that self-image. She had never been in control. She had always been reacting to situations others created. She found a Betamax tape during one case, an ancient format that required significant effort to play. The tape contained home videos from her childhood, showing a young Faye with parents and locations she didn't remember. Ed helped her track down the location from the tape, leading Faye to ruins on Earth, where her old home had once stood. She found nothing there but rubble and ghosts. The experience of standing in a place she should remember but couldn't access emotionally left her feeling more disconnected than before. Her identity remained something constructed in the present, untethered from the foundation that most people received from their childhoods. This realization, rather than bringing closure, deepened her sense of being adrift in the universe. The Bebop crew became her only real connection to anything, the only people who knew the person she had become rather than the person she used to be. But it was Spike's past that would ultimately destroy the careful balance the crew had achieved. The Red Dragon Syndicate had never stopped existing. Vicious had remained with the organization, climbing its hierarchy through violence and cunning. Mao Yenrai, growing older and more philosophical, had begun advocating for peace with rival gangs, for reduced violence and increased cooperation. Vicious viewed this stance as weakness, as betrayal of the principles that made the syndicate powerful. The conflict between Mao's peace faction and Vicious's war faction created instability within the organization. Various members began choosing sides, positioning themselves for whatever resolution emerged. The Van, the Council of Elders at the syndicate's top, watched these developments with concern, but took no decisive action, perhaps hoping the factions would resolve their differences without forcing the leadership to make difficult choices. Spike remained ignorant of these developments for a time. His syndicate life felt distant, something that had happened to a different person. He rarely thought about Vicious or Julia, having trained himself to focus on the present rather than dwell on what he had lost. But the past has a way of finding people who try to escape it. A woman named Annie, who ran a convenience store in Tharsis, had once been a syndicate member herself. She had known Spike during his years with the organization. She maintained connections within that world even after leaving it, keeping informed about developments and changes. When Spike stopped at her store during a bounty hunt, she recognized him immediately, despite years having passed. Annie's shop served as an intelligence hub for those who knew its true purpose. She sold herbs, cigarettes, and sundries to regular customers, but for those connected to the criminal underworld, she provided information, safe spaces for meetings, and connections that official channels couldn't offer. Her departure from the syndicate hadn't been hostile. She simply decided the life no longer suited her and transitioned into a role that allowed her to observe without participating directly. The syndicate tolerated her presence because she maintained absolute discretion. Information flowed through her shop, but she never betrayed confidences or played sides against each other. This neutrality kept her alive and made her valuable to everyone who needed to navigate Tharsis's criminal landscape. When Spike walked into her shop, Annie's face showed a mixture of surprise and relief. Most people believed him dead, but she had suspected otherwise. The syndicate's official story about his death had inconsistencies that someone with her experience would notice. She had waited years to see if he would resurface. Now here he stood, older and carrying himself differently, but unmistakably the same person she had known during his syndicate years. Their conversation carried weight beyond its surface simplicity. Annie understood what Spike had sacrificed to escape, and she understood what his return to Tharsis risked. She warned him that Vicious had changed, that his former partner had become something more dangerous than the young enforcer Spike remembered. Annie told him that most people in the syndicate believed him dead. Vicious had reported his death, and no one had questioned that story. But she also told him about Julia, that she was alive and still entangled with Vicious. This information destabilized something in Spike. He had convinced himself that Julia was beyond reach, that his survival meant nothing to her because she thought him dead. Learning she was alive, and presumably still with Vicious, forced him to confront feelings he had buried. Around this time, the tension between Mao and Vicious reached its breaking point. Mao arranged a meeting with leaders from the White Dragon Syndicate, a rival organization. He intended to negotiate territories and establish peace between the groups. Vicious saw this as the perfect opportunity to eliminate Mao and seize control of the Red Dragon faction that had been loyal to the old man. Vicious brought his own team to the meeting. When Mao and the White Dragon leaders began their negotiations, Vicious's people opened fire. They killed everyone in the room except Vicious himself, eliminating both the White Dragon leadership and Mao in a single action. The attack was bold and ruthless, exactly the kind of move that established dominance through fear and decisive violence. The assassination sent shockwaves through Mars's criminal underworld. The Red Dragon Syndicate fragmented, with some members supporting Vicious's takeover and others viewing him as a traitor who had killed their respected leader. The ISSP, seeing opportunity in this chaos, placed enormous bounties on Syndicate members, particularly those aligned with Vicious. Faye, unaware of Spike's history with the Syndicate, pursued one of these bounties independently. She tracked a Syndicate member to a location where she thought she could make an easy capture. Instead, she walked into a trap. Vicious's people had anticipated that bounties would attract cowboys and had prepared a situation designed to capture or kill anyone who came hunting. They took Faye prisoner and contacted the Bebop, knowing that bounty hunters often worked in teams. Vicious himself spoke to Spike during this call. The recognition was mutual and immediate. Vicious knew that Spike lived, that his report of Spike's death years ago had been false. Spike heard his former partner's voice for the first time in years. The conversation was brief, carrying implications that neither man fully stated. Vicious proposed an exchange, Faye's life for Spike's presence at a specific location. Jet tried to stop Spike from going. He pointed out the obvious reality that this was a trap designed to kill him. Whatever history Spike had with these people, walking into their ambush served no purpose except suicide. But Spike went anyway. He took weapons and his fighter craft, the Swordfish II, and left the Bebop heading for the coordinates Vicious had specified. The location was an old cathedral, a building that carried personal significance for Spike and Vicious both. They had come here during their years as partners in the Syndicate, sometimes for business, sometimes simply as a place away from the organization's constant demands. The cathedral served as neutral ground, a space where they could speak without the roles and expectations of their positions. Vicious's people filled the cathedral when Spike arrived, dozens of armed Syndicate members positioned throughout the building. Spike walked in anyway, his movements carrying the strange calm of someone who had accepted his death. The fight that followed, demonstrated why Spike had survived so long in dangerous work. He moved through the cathedral like water, flowing between attacks, using the environment and his opponent's mistakes against them. Bodies fell around him as he advanced toward the upper levels, where Vicious waited. The confrontation between Spike and Vicious happened in the cathedral's tower, a circular room with stained glass windows that filtered colored light across the space. They faced each other as the bodies of Vicious's men lay scattered throughout the floors below. Vicious held his katana. Spike carried a pistol. The weapons represented their different approaches to violence. They talked briefly before fighting. Vicious expressed satisfaction at finally having the opportunity to kill Spike properly, to finish what should have ended years ago. Spike responded with questions about Julia, about whether Vicious had harmed her. Vicious's answer suggested he didn't know where Julia was, that she had disappeared recently. This information changed something in Spike's expression, introducing the possibility of hope where before there had been only resignation. The fight itself was brutal and unrestrained. Vicious's sword cut through the air in arcs designed to bisect. Spike dodged and returned fire, his shots forcing Vicious to stay mobile. The enclosed space favored neither fighter particularly. They were too well matched, too familiar with each other's patterns. The fight ended not through decisive victory, but through circumstance. A grenade exploded in the tower, thrown by one of Vicious's surviving men, who apparently felt his leader needed assistance. The blast shattered the stained glass windows and sent both fighters sprawling. In the chaos, Spike escaped through a window, falling into a lower section of the building before making his way back to his fighter. He left Vicious alive in the cathedral, both of them bleeding, neither having achieved what they came for. Spike returned to the Bebop injured and uncommunicative. Jet asked no questions, recognizing that whatever had happened belonged to parts of Spike's life that he kept private. Faye, rescued during Spike's assault on the cathedral, remained curious but received no answers to her inquiries. The crew moved on to their next bounty, maintaining the illusion that nothing fundamental had changed. But everything had changed. Spike now knew that Julia lived and that Vicious knew he survived. The careful separation between his syndicate past and his cowboy present had collapsed entirely. He began searching for Julia through whatever channels his old contacts could provide, always carefully, knowing that too much visibility would bring syndicate attention. The search led Spike to Callisto, one of Jupiter's moons, following fragments of information that suggested Julia might have passed through its colony settlements. Faye had been pursuing her own investigation and crossed Spike's path unexpectedly. She tried to follow him, curious about what could drive him to abandon a bounty hunt mid-pursuit. Their separate paths converged on a bar where a musician named Gren performed haunting saxophone melodies that seemed to capture the moon's cold loneliness. Gren proved to be more than a simple musician. He had served alongside Vicious during a war years earlier, fighting on Titan, where military actions had required soldiers to endure conditions that destroyed bodies and minds alike. The two men had been close during that period, brothers in arms facing death together. But Vicious had betrayed Gren in a way that echoed his later betrayal of Spike. When military authorities discovered illegal activities, Vicious framed Gren for crimes he hadn't committed. Gren spent years in prison, while Vicious advanced within the syndicate. The betrayal came with additional consequences. During the war, military experiments had exposed Gren to drugs designed to enhance soldier performance. The chemicals altered his body fundamentally, giving him characteristics of both male and female physiology. He developed breasts while maintaining masculine features elsewhere. This transformation left him existing between genders, belonging fully to neither category. Society's rigid definitions had no place for someone like him. After prison, he made his way to Callisto and survived as a musician and occasional criminal, his saxophone expressing emotions that words couldn't capture. When Spike encountered Gren in that bar, neither man initially recognized the connection between them. They talked about Julia. Gren revealed that a woman matching her description had been on Callisto recently, staying hidden and avoiding syndicate attention. This information energized Spike, suggesting he was close to finding her. But the conversation took complicated turns. Gren seemed to know more than he admitted. His relationship with Vicious, though years passed, still influenced how he viewed the present. Faye's investigation led her to Gren independently. She saw him as a potential bounty, someone whose complicated legal status might translate to reward money. But she also found herself drawn to his music and his story. Gren treated her with courtesy mixed with sadness. He saw in Faye someone else displaced from where they belonged, another person society had no proper category for. They talked through the night, sharing stories about not fitting into the lives they were supposed to inhabit. Vicious arrived on Callisto, pursuing his own objectives. A drug deal had been arranged, one of many transactions that funded syndicate operations. He needed to secure Red-Eye supplies for distribution across Mars. The buyer was Gren, who had maintained criminal connections since his release from prison. Neither knew initially that their meeting would resurrect their shared past. When Vicious saw Gren, recognition came immediately. The years hadn't disguised Gren enough to hide his identity from someone who had once known him intimately. The confrontation happened in a warehouse where the drug exchange was scheduled. Vicious arrived with his men, expecting a routine transaction. Gren brought the payment and his own armed support. When they faced each other, the weight of their history made business impossible. Vicious seemed momentarily unsettled by seeing Gren alive and transformed. Gren's rage at his betrayer had simmered for years, waiting for opportunity to express itself. Spike appeared at this meeting, having tracked Vicious through contacts and informed guesses. He hoped Vicious might lead him to Julia, or at least provide information about her whereabouts. Instead, he walked into a situation primed for violence. Three men with complicated histories confronted each other, while their respective allies watched with weapons ready. The warehouse became a powder keg, needing only a spark. Gren provided that spark. He revealed to Spike and everyone present that Vicious had betrayed him years ago, had ruined his life to save his own skin. He pulled out a device that revealed the Red-Eye drugs contained transmitters. Rather than complete the transaction, Gren had planned to use the drugs to destroy Vicious. The transmitters would detonate explosives he had planted throughout the warehouse. Everyone would die, Gren included, but he would take Vicious with him. The betrayal triggered immediate violence. Vicious's men opened fire. Gren's people returned fire. Spike found himself caught between factions, trying to survive while understanding none of the context. The warehouse erupted into chaos as bullets flew and explosions began. Smoke and fire filled the space. Men died screaming. Gren escaped during the confusion, heading for his ship. Vicious pursued, determined to end the threat Gren represented. Spike followed, less interested in the drug deal than in confronting Vicious about Julia. They ended up in a three-way chase through Callisto's icy landscape, then up into space as all three men reached their respective spacecraft. The dogfight that followed tested piloting skills and strategic thinking. Gren's ship wasn't designed for combat, but he flew with the desperation of someone who had nothing left to lose. Vicious's craft bristled with weapons, but Gren's knowledge of his plans allowed him to predict and counter attacks. Spike's swordfish too danced between them, sometimes helping Gren, sometimes just trying to survive. During the aerial combat, Gren activated his ultimate gambit. The transmitters in the Red-Eye drugs that Vicious's ship carried began broadcasting final signals. Explosions rocked Vicious's craft from within, damaging systems and forcing him to retreat. Gren took severe damage to his own ship in the process. Spike tried to help, but Gren waved him off. He set course for Titan, the moon where he and Vicious had fought together years ago. He wanted to die there, to return to the place where his life had changed forever. Spike matched Gren's course, staying close as both ships limped toward Titan. They talked over communication channels as they flew. Gren explained his history with Vicious, the betrayal, the imprisonment, the experiments that had altered his body. He spoke about Julia too. She had been on Callisto, hiding from Vicious. Gren had helped her, providing shelter and information about syndicate movements. She had left before Vicious arrived, heading for locations only she and Spike would know about. Gren had known all along that Spike was searching for her. He had wanted to help, but circumstances had made direct assistance impossible. As they approached Titan, Gren's ship began failing completely. Systems shut down one by one. Life support wavered. Gren knew he wouldn't survive to reach the surface. He made peace with this, expressing something almost like gratitude that his story would end at Titan rather than in some anonymous location. He told Spike to find Julia, to escape the cycle of revenge and betrayal that had destroyed so many lives. Then his communication went silent. His ship drifted into Titan's atmosphere, burning up on entry. Spike watched from his own craft, unable to save someone who didn't want saving. The Jupiter Jazz incident left Spike with confirmed knowledge that Julia lived and had been recently on Callisto. She was actively hiding, moving between colonies to stay ahead of Vicious's searches. This meant she was in danger constantly, but also that she hadn't forgotten him. She was trying to stay alive, presumably hoping that circumstances would eventually allow them to reunite. This knowledge changed Spike's approach. He stopped actively searching, recognizing that his efforts might draw attention that would endanger her more. Instead, he waited, trusting that Julia would contact him when the time was right. Around this period, between the Cathedral confrontation and the final resolution, events occurred that would later be documented as a separate story. A bioterrorist named Vincent Volaju emerged on Mars with a plan to release a nanomachine-based virus that would kill millions. The Bebop crew became involved in stopping this plot, primarily through Spike's combat encounters with Vincent and Faye's investigation into the terrorists' background. Vincent proved to be a former soldier driven insane by military experiments, a man who viewed releasing the virus as a form of liberation for humanity. The resolution of this crisis involved intense action across Mars, culminating in a confrontation aboard a Martian city tower during a Halloween celebration. Spike defeated Vincent in close combat, and Elektra, Vincent's former lover and the scientist who had helped create the virus, provided the cure that saved Spike's life after he had been infected. This adventure, dangerous as it was, represented a diversion from the deeper crisis developing between Spike and his past. The crew returned to normal operations afterward, though normal had become increasingly strained. One final case before everything fell apart involved a bomber known as the Teddy Bomber, who planted explosives while delivering philosophical manifestos about society's ills. The case would have been routine, except for the appearance of Cowboy Andy, a self-proclaimed cowboy who saw Spike as his rival. Andy dressed in elaborate Western costume, complete with white hat and flowing duster. He rode horses instead of using vehicles, carried revolvers instead of modern weapons, and spoke in exaggerated frontier dialect. He represented everything Spike wasn't, showboating and desperate for attention, while Spike operated with understated efficiency. Andy's interference turned the bounty hunt into farce. Every time Spike closed in on the Teddy Bomber, Andy would appear with dramatic flourish and ruin the approach. The Teddy Bomber himself grew frustrated that nobody listened to his manifestos, constantly interrupted by Andy's grand entrances or Spike's pragmatic pursuit. The situation escalated through multiple confrontations, with Andy convinced he and Spike were engaged in an epic rivalry, while Spike just wanted Andy to leave him alone. The chase reached absurd heights during a final confrontation at a museum. Andy arrived on horseback through the front entrance. Spike pursued on foot, trying to maintain focus on the actual bounty. The Teddy Bomber set his explosive and prepared to deliver his message about society's decay. Before anyone could stop him, Andy's horse kicked a pillar, causing a chain reaction that brought part of the building down on both the bomber and Andy himself. The police arrived to find everyone buried in rubble. Spike escaped without the bounty. Andy recovered to promise future rivalry, and the Teddy Bomber went to prison, still trying to explain his philosophy to anyone who would listen. The absurdity of the case felt like a strange counterpoint to the darkness gathering around Spike's life. Comedy and tragedy existed side by side, just as they did throughout the Bebop's adventures. Andy represented a world where being a cowboy meant performance and style. Spike represented reality, where being a cowboy meant survival, and accepting that sometimes the absurd and the serious were impossible to separate. Ed and Ein, sensing perhaps that darker times approached, chose to leave the Bebop. Ed's father had reappeared in her life, offering an opportunity to reconnect. Ian, loyal to Ed, left with her. The departure happened suddenly, with Ed leaving only a brief message that she was going her own way. Faye left shortly after. Her departure stemmed from different motivations. She had been searching for information about her past, and finally found a lead suggesting she might recover actual memories rather than just documentary evidence. She didn't explain where she was going or whether she intended to return. Like Ed, she simply left, reducing the crew back to just Spike and Jet. Jet understood that something significant was developing, though Spike continued to avoid direct discussion of his past. They took on bounties mechanically, going through the motions of their work, while the atmosphere aboard the Bebop grew increasingly tense. Spike spent long hours staring out at space, smoking cigarettes, and presumably thinking about Julia and the life he had lost when he left the syndicate. The message came through an intermediary, someone from Spike's past who knew how to reach him. Julia was alive and wanted to meet. She had been hiding from Vicious, knowing that he would kill her once he learned about her relationship with Spike. But circumstances had changed. The syndicate's internal conflicts had created opportunities for escape. She proposed a meeting place, a location away from syndicate territory, where they might have a chance to disappear together. Spike prepared to leave the Bebop. He told Jet very little, only that he needed to handle something from his past and might not return. Jet, who had learned over their years together not to push for information Spike didn't want to share, accepted this with resignation. He watched Spike leave in the Swordfish 2, knowing that the partnership they had built was likely ending, that Spike was flying towards something that would either free him or kill him. Julia waited at the designated meeting place, and for a brief period, it seemed as though they might succeed in their escape. They reunited after years of separation, all the feelings they had suppressed flooding back. They made plans quickly, identifying a location in the outer colonies where syndicate reach didn't extend. They would leave immediately, right then, before anyone realized what was happening. But Vicious had tracked Julia. Syndicate assassins appeared at the meeting location, disrupting their reunion and forcing Spike and Julia to flee. They ran through the streets of Tharsis, fighting off attackers and trying to reach Spike's fighter. In the chaos and violence, Julia was shot, not by any named character or through dramatic confrontation, but simply caught in crossfire from multiple shooters, the kind of random casualty that happened in violent situations. She died in Spike's arms in an alley. Her last words were about the dream they had shared, about the escape they had planned. She expressed regret that they wouldn't have the opportunity to live that different life. Then she was gone, and Spike was alone with her body and the complete destruction of any hope he had maintained for years. He returned to the Bebop in a state that Jet had never seen before. The laid-back demeanor that Spike usually projected had vanished entirely. What remained was something cold and purposeful. Jet recognized immediately that Spike intended to return to the syndicate to finish whatever had started years ago. He tried to talk Spike out of this course of action, pointing out that it would certainly end in death, that revenge wouldn't bring Julia back, that the life they had built as cowboys was worth preserving. Spike listened to Jet's arguments, then dismissed them. He explained in fragments that he had been living with half his soul dead for years, that Julia's death had simply confirmed the reality he already knew. The life he had been living aboard the Bebop wasn't really life. It was marking time, waiting for resolution that he had always known would come. He said goodbye to Jet properly, one of the few times in their partnership that either man had been fully honest about their regard for each other. Faye returned to the Bebop just before Spike left. She had failed to recover her memories and came back to the only home she had in the present. She found Jet standing in the hangar, watching Spike prepare his fighter. She demanded to know what was happening, where Spike was going. When Jet explained that Spike was going to die, that he was returning to his past to settle accounts he couldn't walk away from, Faye tried to stop him. She confronted Spike directly, asked him why he had to leave, whether the crew they had built meant nothing. Spike's response was gentle but final. He told her about living with one eye that saw the past and one that saw the present, never fully inhabiting either time. Julia's death had closed the eye that saw the present. All that remained was the past and the need to finish it. He told Faye to take care of herself, then launched the Swordfish 2 and flew toward Mars. The Red Dragon Syndicate's headquarters stood in Tharsis, the massive skyscraper that had represented their power for decades. Vicious had taken control of the organization after killing Mao, consolidating power through fear and violence. The Van, the Council of Elders, had initially opposed his takeover, but Vicious had eliminated them too, restructuring the syndicate entirely under his sole leadership. Spike arrived at the building and walked through the entrance openly. Syndicate members filled the lobby, all of them armed and aware that an enemy approached. They opened fire as Spike advanced. What followed was a running battle through multiple floors of the building. Spike moved through it with the detachment of someone already dead, shooting with mechanical precision, dodging through instinct rather than conscious thought. Bodies accumulated in his wake as he climbed toward the upper floors where Vicious waited. The building's design forced him through various spaces: office floors where syndicate members conducted business, ceremonial rooms where the organization had made important decisions, storage areas filled with crates and equipment. Each space became a battlefield. Spike exhausted ammunition and acquired more from fallen enemies. He sustained multiple wounds, none immediately fatal, each adding to accumulated damage that slowed his movements incrementally. The final confrontation happened in the Syndicate's council chamber, the room where the Van had once directed the organization's operations. Vicious waited there, sitting in the council's main seat, his katana across his lap. The room was empty, except for them. All of Vicious's surviving men had already fallen to Spike's advance through the building, or had fled when they realized they faced someone who couldn't be stopped. They faced each other across the council chamber. Vicious stood and drew his katana. Spike readied his weapon. Neither spoke initially. Everything they might have said to each other had already been expressed through years of conflict. The friendship they had once shared belonged to different people, earlier versions of themselves who had died in various ways over the years. When they did speak, the words were brief. Vicious commented that Spike looked like he had seen a ghost, that death followed him visibly. Spike responded that Vicious had already died years ago, that he had killed the man who had once been his friend through betrayals and choices that destroyed bonds between people. They acknowledged that this confrontation would end with one or both of them dead, that there were no other possible resolutions remaining. The final fight was swift and brutal. Vicious struck with his katana, the blade singing through the air in arcs designed to kill. Spike moved through the attacks, exhaustion making his dodges slower than they had been earlier. He returned fire, his shots calculated and precise. They wounded each other multiple times, neither willing to stop or retreat. The fight ended when Spike shot Vicious in the chest at close range, the impact throwing Vicious backward into the council seat. Vicious died sitting in that chair, the position of power he had fought and betrayed to achieve. His last expression suggested satisfaction rather than fear, as though he had expected this outcome and welcomed it. Spike stood over his former friend's body, his own wounds bleeding freely, his strength fading from accumulated damage and blood loss. Spike walked through the building one final time, past bodies and destruction, out into the sunlight. He stood on the steps outside the headquarters, looking up at the sky. Some accounts suggest he smiled during these final moments. The image of him standing there, backlit by sky, became the last clear picture of Spike Spiegel. he collapsed on the steps. Whether he died there or survived was left deliberately ambiguous in the retelling. On the Bebop, Jet and Faye watched news reports of the violence at Syndicate headquarters. They didn't discuss what it meant or whether Spike might return. They simply existed in the aftermath, their crew reduced, their purpose unclear. Ed and Ein were gone. Spike was gone. What remained was two people who had been running from their pasts, now left to face futures they hadn't planned for. The Bebop continued operating in the months that followed. Jet took on bounties because that was what he knew how to do. Faye stayed because she had nowhere else to go and no one else to go with. They maintained the ship, pursued criminals, collected occasional bounties. The routine continued, but the energy that had animated their crew's adventures had dissipated. They were going through motions, surviving rather than truly living. On Earth, Ed continued her existence among the ruins, raising herself and Ein in the wild spaces that humanity had abandoned. She hacked occasionally, took on projects that interested her, and maintained the cheerful peculiarity that had always defined her personality. She thought about the Bebop sometimes, but didn't return to it. That chapter had closed, and Ed had never been one to dwell on conclusions when new adventures awaited. Throughout the solar system, life continued its patterns. Mars bustled with activity. The criminal organizations that had lost leadership restructured under new management, and the ISSP continued its overwhelmed attempts to maintain order. The hyperspace gates carried traffic between worlds, humanity's scattered colonies maintaining their connection through technology that had once nearly destroyed them. The story of Cowboy Bebop is ultimately about people trying to escape their pasts and learning that true escape is impossible. Spike couldn't outrun his history with the Syndicate, his love for Julia, or his complicated relationship with Vicious. Jet couldn't escape the betrayals that had driven him from police work, or the protective nature that had cost him Elisa. Faye couldn't recover memories that would anchor her identity in a world where she remained fundamentally displaced from time. What they found instead of escape was temporary family, a crew that functioned despite never fully resolving any of its members' deeper problems. They shared space aboard an aging ship, pursued bounties that rarely paid enough, and created brief moments of connection between long periods of isolation. This wasn't the resolution any of them would have chosen, but it was what circumstances allowed. The sessions of their lives, like the episodes named after musical concepts, formed patterns that repeated with variations. Chase the bounty, fail to collect, scrape by on minimal resources, then do it again. Within these cycles, moments of genuine emotion and connection appeared. Spike protecting Ed, Jet cooking meals for the crew, Faye returning to the Bebop even when she claimed she wouldn't, Ian sitting patiently through all the human drama surrounding him. These small moments constituted the actual substance of their time together, more meaningful than the bounties they pursued or the pasts they fled. The work gave structure to their days, but the relationships, reluctant and incomplete as they were, gave purpose to the work. When those relationships ended through Ed's departure and Spike's final return to his past, what remained felt hollow despite the routine continuing. In the weeks and months after Spike's departure, Jet and Faye settled into a new dynamic. They talked more than they had before, filling space that Spike and Ed had previously occupied. Jet played more jazz, spending evenings with his music, while Faye gambled online or watched old films. They rarely discussed Spike directly, but his absence informed every conversation through what remained unsaid. Occasionally, one of them would mention a memory, something funny Ed had done, or the time Spike had handled a particular situation in an unexpected way. These mentions came randomly, triggered by current situations that paralleled past experiences. They represented the only memorial the crew gave to members who had left. No ceremonies, no prolonged mourning, just occasional acknowledgements that the past had contained more people than the present. The Bebop itself showed its age increasingly. Systems that Jet had maintained through careful attention began failing with greater frequency. The ship had been old when Jet purchased it, and years of bounty hunting had added wear that proper maintenance could have prevented if they had ever achieved consistent financial success. Faye suggested abandoning the ship and finding better transportation, but Jet refused. The Bebop was his home in ways that transcended its functionality. Faye developed deeper gambling addictions during this period. Without the distraction of a full crew and with nothing but bounty hunting to fill her days, she spent more time in casinos and online gambling sites. The debt that had plagued her since awakening from cryogenic suspension continued growing. She won occasionally, large amounts that briefly suggested she might achieve financial stability, then lost everything, plus more in subsequent sessions. The cycle repeated endlessly, another pattern that offered structure without resolution. But these developments belong to the aftermath, to the story that continued after the main narrative ended. The essential story of Cowboy Bebop concludes with Spike standing in the sunlight outside the Red Dragon Syndicate headquarters, having finally confronted the past that haunted him for years. Whether he survived that confrontation or died there remains deliberately ambiguous, left to individual interpretation. Some insist he died, that the accumulated wounds and blood loss would have been fatal, that the smile he wore suggested acceptance of death. Others argue he survived, that someone with his skills and resilience could recover from those injuries, that his story couldn't end so abruptly. Both interpretations find support in the evidence. Both feel true to the character and themes. What matters more than his survival is that he faced what he had been avoiding. For years, Spike had existed in a liminal state between his past and present, never fully committing to either. His relationship with the Bebop crew remained distant because he couldn't risk forming attachments while half his heart remained with Julia. His work as a cowboy served as distraction rather than purpose, something to fill time while he waited for resolution. Julia's death forced that resolution. It destroyed any possibility of escape, any chance that he might reclaim the life he had lost when he left the syndicate. With that hope gone, only one path remained: to finish the story his younger self had started. The confrontation with Vicious represented completion rather than revenge, the final chapter of a narrative that had been paused but never abandoned. The broader themes of Cowboy Bebop extend beyond any individual character's arc. The anime explores loneliness as a fundamental condition of existence in a scattered, post-Earth humanity. Every character aboard the Bebop carries profound isolation: Spike's memories of Julia and his lost life, Jet's betrayals by partner and lover, Faye's displacement from time and loss of identity, Ed's abandonment by her father. Even Ian, enhanced beyond normal canine intelligence, exists in a space between dog and something more, never quite belonging fully to either category. These isolations draw them together, while simultaneously keeping them apart. They form a crew because none of them fit anywhere else, but they maintain distance because intimacy requires trust they can't afford. The Bebop becomes a ship of ghosts, people who exist in the present while haunted by pasts they can't fully escape or resolve. They move through the solar system chasing bounties that rarely pay off, just as they chase resolutions to personal problems that have no satisfying solutions. The music that fills the show, the jazz and blues that composer Yoko Kanno created, underscores this melancholy. Jazz works through improvisation, musicians responding to each other in the moment, creating something beautiful that can never be exactly replicated. The Bebop crew operates similarly, improvising their way through situations, creating brief moments of harmony before discord inevitably returns. Each session of their adventures follows its own rhythm, its own structure and resolution, while contributing to larger patterns that only become clear through the full series. Individual bounties may fail, but the accumulation of experiences shapes the characters incrementally. Relationships deepen despite efforts to maintain distance. The found family that none of them admit to wanting gradually becomes real through shared meals, shared dangers, and shared frustrations with their collective poverty and bad luck. The solar system they inhabit reflects humanity's tendency to carry old patterns into new environments. Despite colonizing multiple worlds, people brought their conflicts, their crimes, and their power structures with them. Mars replicates Earth's urban chaos. The Syndicate mirrors historical organized crime organizations. The ISSP functions like overwhelmed police departments throughout history, trying to maintain order with insufficient resources. Technology advanced, but human nature remained consistent. This creates a universe that feels both futuristic and nostalgic, a quality the show deliberately cultivates through its visual style and cultural references. The aesthetics pull from film noir, Western movies, kung fu cinema, and other genres that peaked decades or centuries before the show's 2071 setting. The characters watch old films, listen to old music, and reference cultural touchstones from a lost Earth. They exist in the future, while emotionally residing in a past they've romanticized beyond reality. The Bebop itself embodies this quality. It's a converted fishing vessel, old-fashioned technology repurposed for bounty hunting. Spike's Swordfish II fighter, Faye's hammerhead ship, even Jet's mechanical arm, all represent aesthetics that feel retro despite the futuristic setting. The show suggests that advancement doesn't erase what came before. Past and future exist simultaneously, and people choose which timeline to emotionally inhabit. Spike chose to inhabit the past, which eventually forced his confrontation with Vicious and the Syndicate. Faye tried to recover a past she couldn't remember, eventually accepting that she had to build identity from the present rather than recovering it from lost memories. Jet carried his past's lessons forward, letting betrayals inform how he approached relationships without allowing them to completely prevent new connections. Ed, youngest and least burdened by history, lived almost entirely in the present, moving from moment to moment with a freedom the adults couldn't achieve. These different approaches to time and memory create the show's core tension. Everyone wants something from a different temporal location. Spike wants the past with Julia. Faye wants to understand her erased history. Jet wants to move forward from his betrayals. Ed just wants entertainment and interesting experiences. These incompatible desires make genuine connection difficult, but not impossible. In moments of crisis, they function as a crew effectively, despite their individual trajectories, pulling in different directions. The show's conclusion, with the crew fragmenting and Spike facing his death or near death, feels inevitable in retrospect. The temporary nature of their arrangement was always visible. They came together through circumstances, maintained uneasy partnership through mutual need, but always remained individuals with separate destinies. Ed left when she found her father. Ian left because he followed Ed. Spike left because his past gave him no choice. Only Jet and Faye remained because they had nowhere else to go and no one else to go with. This isn't a tragic ending so much as an honest one. The show never pretended that Cowboy Bebop would last forever, or that bounty hunting aboard an aging ship represented anyone's ideal future. It was what circumstances allowed, a temporary arrangement that provided shelter and purpose for people who needed both. When circumstances changed, the arrangement ended. That's not failure, that's reality. The question of whether Spike died admits no definitive answer because the show's creators chose to leave it ambiguous deliberately. Both possibilities carry weight and meaning. If he died, he achieved the resolution his character arc required, finally confronting his past and dying in the process. If he survived, he faces the even more challenging task of building a new life after losing literally everything. Julia, Vicious, the Syndicate, even his crew. Either path completes his journey in thematically appropriate ways. What's certain is that the life he lived aboard the Bebop, the relationships he formed with Jet, Faye, Ed, and Ein, mattered despite their imperfect nature and temporary duration. Those years gave him something his Syndicate life never provided: genuine partnership without the constant threat of betrayal. Jet never lied to him. Faye never manipulated him for personal gain. Ed accepted him without judgment or expectation. These simple facts represented more value than all the money he never earned through bounty hunting. The same held true for the others. Jet found partnership again, despite his betrayal by Fad. He learned he could trust Spike to have his back in dangerous situations, to split bounties fairly, to maintain their arrangement honestly. This didn't heal the wound Fad had created, but it proved that betrayal didn't have to be permanent and universal, that trust remained possible even after devastation. Faye found family in a world where everyone and everything she had known was dead. The crew wasn't perfect. They argued about money, mocked her gambling addiction, and rolled their eyes at her schemes. But they also came for her when she was captured. They gave her space aboard their ship. They accepted her presence without requiring her to change or resolve her issues. For someone displaced from time, this acceptance represented an anchor, a connection to the present that her missing memories couldn't provide. The Bebop itself became more than transportation. The aging ship, with its constant malfunctions and cramped quarters, transformed into home through shared experiences. Jet maintained it with the care of someone who understood that physical spaces could hold emotional significance. He cooked meals in the small galley, creating routines that gave structure to their chaotic lives. The smell of his cooking, the sound of his jazz records playing through the ship's speakers. These sensory details became associated with safety and belonging for crew members who had never known stable homes. The ship's common areas hosted countless conversations. Spike and Jet would sit for hours discussing philosophy, bounties, or nothing in particular. Faye would interject with commentary that ranged from insightful to deliberately provocative. Ed would sprawl across furniture in positions that defied anatomy, contributing observations that seemed nonsensical until they suddenly made perfect sense. Ian would observe it all, his intelligent eyes tracking conversations with an awareness that suggested understanding beyond typical canine cognition. These ordinary moments mattered as much as the dramatic confrontations. The times when they sat together eating bell peppers and beef without the beef, complaining about poverty but still choosing to stay together rather than pursue individual opportunities that might have paid better. The times when someone returned from a solo adventure and the others expressed relief through insults and complaints, rather than direct admission that they had worried. The times when they simply existed in the same space, each doing their own thing but taking comfort from proximity. Ed found entertainment and adventure with people who tolerated her eccentricities and protected her when situations became dangerous. Her childhood on abandoned Earth had been lonely, despite her outward cheer. Aboard the Bebop, she had companions, even if they didn't always understand her or appreciate her hacking into their personal files. When she left to reconnect with her father, she did so knowing she had experienced genuine friendship, that people existed who cared about her well-being. Her departure represented growth rather than abandonment. Ed recognized that she needed to attempt reconnection with her father, to see if that relationship could be salvaged or if she needed to fully close that chapter. The crew understood, even if they struggled to express it. They had taught her, through their own examples, that dealing with past relationships was sometimes necessary for moving forward. Her choice to leave demonstrated the confidence they had helped her develop. Even Ein, whose intelligence exceeded normal canine capacity without reaching full human cognition, found belonging. He lived alongside people who fed him, took him on adventures, and treated him as a crew member rather than just a pet. His enhanced intelligence meant he existed between categories, too smart to be simply a dog, but not human enough to fully participate in human society. Aboard the Bebop, this in-between status fit perfectly among a crew of people who themselves existed between categories and identities. The data dog's presence affected the crew in subtle ways. His silence contrasted with Ed's constant chatter. His loyalty provided stability that the humans' complicated emotions often disrupted. When Ein sat beside someone who was upset, offering wordless company, it reminded them that connection didn't always require speech or understanding. Sometimes presence was enough. Sometimes being there mattered more than knowing what to say. The show's epilogue, such as it exists, offers no neat resolutions. Jet and Faye continue their work. Somewhere, Ed and Ian explore Earth's ruins. Spike is dead or recovering, depending on interpretation. The universe continues its patterns unchanged by the small drama of a few bounty hunters' lives. The Red Dragon Syndicate, despite losing leadership, will reform under new management. Other cowboys will chase bounties across the solar system. Life persists regardless of individual outcomes. This creates a bittersweet final impression. The crew mattered to each other. Their time together held meaning and value. But the universe didn't pause to acknowledge their story. They were small figures moving through vast spaces, creating brief moments of connection before circumstances pulled them apart. This reflects reality more honestly than stories that suggest individual narratives reshape entire universes. Most lives matter primarily to those directly involved, touching the wider world only in small, hard-to-measure ways. And yet, those small touches ripple outward in ways that can't be fully tracked. Spike's assault on the Syndicate headquarters killed dozens of members and eliminated its leadership. Whether the organization that emerges from this chaos will be better or worse than what existed before remains unknown. But change occurred. Jet's return to Ganymede and his confrontation with Fad brought closure to corruption that had persisted years. Faye's various schemes left marks on people throughout the solar system. Ed's hacking influenced systems and organizations in ways only another hacker would recognize. These weren't grand, world-changing acts. The Bebop crew didn't save the solar system or reshape society. They didn't find great treasure or achieve fame. They lived modestly, struggled financially, and maintained an existence that many would consider precarious and unsatisfying. But within that modest existence, they created moments of genuine humanity, loyalty, protection, friendship, and sacrifice. These moments don't reshape worlds, but they reshape the individuals involved, which is its own form of significance. The story ends where it began in many ways. Spike standing amid violence, blood on his face, smiling. The first episode showed Asimov smiling as he died, unable to escape his past with the Syndicate. The final episode shows Spike smiling in the same way, having just finished confronting his Syndicate past. The circle closes. The pattern completes. The jazz composition that began 3 years earlier resolves to its final note. And like all good jazz, it stays with you after the music stops. The themes of loneliness, fate, and the weight of history resonate beyond the specific story of 5 characters aboard one ship. Everyone carries some past they can't fully escape. Everyone exists in some form of isolation, despite surface connections with others. Everyone improvises through situations where clear resolution seems impossible. The Bebop crew's story is specific to them but thematically universal. This universality explains the show's lasting impact. Audiences worldwide connected with characters who struggled with fundamental human problems despite the futuristic setting. The genre elements, space travel, hyperspace gates, criminal syndicates, bounty hunting, provided exciting framing for stories that were ultimately about recognizable emotional experiences. Feeling trapped by past mistakes, losing people who mattered, trying to build identity from fragments, looking for belonging and settling for proximity. The music enhanced these emotional resonances, creating atmosphere that words alone couldn't achieve. Yoko Kanno's soundtrack shifted between energetic bebop during action sequences and melancholy blues during introspective moments. Each episode had its distinct musical identity while contributing to the show's overall sonic landscape. The opening theme, Tank, with its driving brass and percussion, became iconic, immediately recognizable to anyone familiar with the show. The visual style matched the music's quality. The animation prioritized character acting and atmospheric detail over flashy effects. Fight scenes featured realistic martial arts rather than superhuman abilities. Space battles emphasized the mechanics of orbital maneuvering and fuel management alongside exciting dogfights. The designs pulled from multiple aesthetic traditions: film noir lighting, Western composition, Hong Kong action cinema choreography, creating a visual language uniquely its own. Voice acting, both in original Japanese and English dub, brought depth to characters who could have been flat archetypes. Spike's casual demeanor hiding deeper pain, Jet's gruff exterior protecting emotional vulnerability, Faye's confident con artist facade masking profound fear and confusion. Ed's manic energy concealing the loneliness of abandoned childhood. These layers existed in the writing, but came fully alive through performers who understood the characters' complexities. The episodic structure allowed exploration of the universe beyond the main crew. Individual sessions introduced characters whose stories paralleled or contrasted with the Bebop crew's experiences. The chess-playing child assassin Shin, the truck driver VT, the eco-terrorists, the cowboy anime enthusiast Cowboy Andy. Each brought their own perspective on life in 2071's solar system, expanding the show's thematic range while maintaining focus on the core cast. Some episodes played as pure comedy, providing relief from heavier material. Others dove deep into character backstory, revealing painful histories that explained present behaviors. A few existed as pure action, showcasing the crew's skills in exciting sequences. This variety prevented tonal monotony while allowing different aspects of the universe and characters to receive attention. You could watch episodes out of order and enjoy them individually, while still appreciating how they contributed to larger narrative and thematic patterns. The show's philosophy, often expressed through dialogue and character actions, tends toward existential acceptance. Whatever happens, happens becomes an unofficial motto, a recognition that control over circumstances is limited, and that resistance to fate often proves futile. This doesn't mean passive acceptance of everything. The characters fight for what matters to them, pursue goals despite long odds, and refuse to surrender to circumstances easily. But they also recognize when situations have moved beyond their influence, when continuing to fight serves no purpose except destroying themselves. This philosophy manifests differently for each character. Jet applies it to his past betrayals, accepting that he can't change what happened with Fad or Elisa. He moves forward carrying those wounds rather than letting them paralyze him. Faye struggles with it more, wanting desperately to recover what she lost, but gradually learning that her amnesia might actually protect her from worse pain. Ed embodies it naturally, approaching each situation with curiosity rather than trying to control outcomes. Even Ayn seems to operate on this principle, accepting circumstances and adapting rather than fighting against what cannot be changed. Spike presents the most complicated relationship with this philosophy. He claims to live by whatever happens, happens, yet his entire arc demonstrates someone who can't let go of the past. He goes through motions of acceptance while remaining fundamentally trapped by what he lost when he left the Syndicate. His casual demeanor masks someone who died years earlier and just hasn't stopped moving yet. This contradiction between stated philosophy and actual behavior creates the tension that drives his character arc toward its inevitable conclusion. The show explores loneliness in all its forms. Physical loneliness, like Ed abandoned on Earth or Faye frozen for decades. Emotional loneliness, like Jet betrayed by people he trusted, or Spike separated from the only woman he loved. Existential loneliness, the sense that everyone experiences isolation, regardless of how many people surround them. The Bebop crew comes together precisely because they're all lonely, yet their togetherness doesn't eliminate that fundamental condition. It just makes it more bearable. This reflects something true about human connection. People don't complete each other or eliminate each other's pain. They simply share space and time, creating moments of relief from isolation without fundamentally solving it. The crew's relationships matter not because they transform anyone's fundamental circumstances, but because they provide temporary shelter from the cold emptiness that surrounds everyone. That shelter is valuable precisely because it's temporary and fragile, requiring constant maintenance and offering no guarantees. The music throughout the show reinforces these themes. Jazz, blues, and rock merge in ways that mirror how the story blends genres and tones. The opening theme's energetic brass suggests adventure and excitement. The melancholy saxophone pieces that score quiet moments convey the sadness underlying even the comedy. The battle themes mix adrenaline with something darker, acknowledging that violence, however stylish, carries costs. Yoko Kanno's compositions don't just accompany the visuals, they create emotional landscapes that deepen every scene. Spike's final assault on the Syndicate represents the exception to this philosophy. He goes despite knowing he'll likely die, despite Jet's arguments about futility, despite having no clear goal beyond confrontation. This violation of his usual approach to life signals that something fundamental has broken in him. Julia's death removed the last constraint keeping him in the present. Without her, without even the possibility of her, he has no reason to continue the half-life he'd been living. The assault itself plays out like a suicide mission dressed in action film aesthetics. Spike walks through the Syndicate headquarters, killing everyone who gets in his way, sustaining wounds that would stop most people, driven by something beyond survival instinct. He's already dead in every way that matters. The physical death is just confirmation of a spiritual death that occurred when Julia died in his arms. His smile at the end suggests someone finally finding peace after years of carrying unbearable weight. This makes his journey tragic rather than heroic. He's not fighting for justice or to make the world better. He's ending his story because continuing it has become unbearable. The smile he wears at the end suggests peace rather than victory, relief at finally finishing business that had remained unresolved too long. Whether he physically dies or not, the person he had been dies in that moment. The past that haunted him for years finally closes. For a show ostensibly about bounty hunters in space, remarkably little emphasizes the space western elements. The genre provides setting and structure, but not substance. The real story explores how people cope with isolation, loss, and the burden of history they can't escape. The bounty hunting gives them purpose and brings them together, but isn't itself the point. It's the excuse for the crew to exist, the framework supporting character studies and thematic exploration. The Western genre traditionally explores frontiers, places where civilization hasn't fully established itself, and individuals must create their own justice. The solar system of 2071 fits this pattern perfectly. Colonies scattered across vast distances, law enforcement stretched impossibly thin, people making lives in harsh environments where support systems are minimal. The cowboys operate in this frontier space, neither fully criminals nor fully lawful, existing in the gray zones where society's rules become unclear. But unlike traditional westerns, Cowboy Bebop doesn't celebrate frontier individualism as automatically heroic. The show recognizes that people operating outside conventional structures often do so because they're damaged or displaced, fundamentally unable to function in normal society. Spike can't hold a regular job because his past makes stability impossible. Jet can't trust formal institutions after his betrayal. Faye can't integrate into society because she has no foundation to build integration upon. Ed never learned conventional social skills. They're cowboys, not because they chose adventure or freedom, but because mainstream life completely rejected them, or they rejected it. This complicates the genre's usual romanticization of outlaws, and makes every adventure carry weight beyond simple excitement. This explains why the show transcends its genre. Science fiction fans appreciate the well-realized future setting and exciting action sequences, but people who normally avoid science fiction connect with the characters' emotional journeys, finding recognition in Spike's romantic tragedy, Jet's midlife crisis, Faye's identity struggles, and Ed's childhood loneliness. The show works on multiple levels simultaneously, offering different entry points for different audiences, while maintaining thematic coherence throughout. The ending that never quite resolves, leaving questions unanswered and futures uncertain, initially frustrates some viewers seeking clearer closure, but it reflects the show's central themes. Life rarely provides neat resolutions. People leave without saying proper goodbyes. Relationships end ambiguously. Major questions about identity and purpose remain forever unresolved. The crew's scattering and Spike's ambiguous fate honor this reality rather than offering false comfort through artificial closure. And so the Bebop drifts through space, its crew reduced but persistent. Jet maintains the ship and pursues bounties because he doesn't know what else to do. Faye gambles and schemes, constructing identity from present choices since the past won't provide it. Somewhere on Earth, Ed hacks and explores with Ayn at her side. finding joy in simply existing without needing grand purpose or clear direction. Spike faces death or recovery, his story complete regardless of biological outcome. The sessions of Cowboy Bebop end with this image of persistence despite loss, of continuing forward because the alternative is surrendering completely. None of the characters achieved what they wanted. Spike lost Julia. Jet never fully recovered from his betrayals. Faye never recovered her memories. Ed's father remains distant despite reconnection. But they survived. They maintained themselves through difficult circumstances, and they created meaning through relationships, even when those relationships proved temporary. This is what the show offers its audience. Not false hope that problems resolve neatly or that persistence guarantees reward. Instead, it acknowledges that life is often difficult, lonely, and marked by loss, while also affirming that connection and meaning remain possible within that difficulty. The Bebop crew created something worthwhile during their time together, even though that time ended. The music they made together continues resonating after the instruments fall silent. As you drift peacefully towards sleep, let this story remind you that perfect resolutions aren't necessary for meaningful experiences, that temporary connections have value, that the past shapes but doesn't completely determine the future, that jazz improvisation through life's chaos can create beautiful moments, even when the larger composition remains unfinished. See you, Space Cowboy.